Hi, Misha here, and yeah, I haven't really been posting much lately. A lot of that has to do with being very active. Cabin stuff was last week, and then this week was really trying to work as best I could. And to be honest, I just haven't been very talkative. Mostly been focusing what spare energy I have on the main channel videos. Haven't really been buying anything, picking up anything new. And every time I think about getting some of the pre-existing stuff I've got out to do videos on this channel, I'm just not really feeling it right now. Just other things on my mind, other things going on, just not in that zone. And a couple of times I almost did it and I thought, what the fuck? This is the personal channel. I'm not obligated to do anything here. This is really only meant to be posting things that I want to for fun, that I feel like, not on a schedule, not obligatory. So I didn't. It also just kind of seems like everyone's traveling for the summer and kind of scattered, and I don't know. But then, of course, today happened, and I've been meaning to post another Blackbox, and it seems like every time I do, something else major happens, and then I never like to immediately react to things. I always like to try to see what's going to happen, how things unfold. In some ways, I'm more of an observer than a commenter, because I know a lot of times that I don't know about things, and I'd rather learn than teach on things I don't really know about, that aren't my forte area of expertise. But, hey. And I want to reiterate something, and this is actually what I was going to say yesterday when I was thinking about doing a Blackbox video, but then just was tired and thought, I'll wait and do it Sunday. I've had a lot of discussions with a lot of people, family members, over the last month, ever since the debate. And ultimately, what I've told them, and I have some members in my family that are very far Democrat, and some that are rather right-leaning, although I wouldn't say any are exactly what I would consider far extremist right in my family, which is good. Despite this or that, I've always said, at the end of the day, I just don't want people to be hurt. I don't want to live in a nation where people are at risk, where people are afraid, where people aren't allowed to live their lives. And not people just me, or like me, or in my area, but everyone. So while everything I said in the previous video about Trump is absolutely still what I think and true, it does not also therefore follow that anything that's happened I condone and think is right or was cheerful of. It also doesn't mean, despite some's conclusion, that I've been pro-Biden. Actually, much to the contrary. Unfortunately, we're in the situation where we have two shit choices. And we're not really in a situation anymore where I think we can legitimately say, I'm going to pick the lesser of two evils. We've had elections like that in the past. No. Sometimes you can't pick the lesser of two evils. Sometimes that's just not a thing. The problem is, I don't have an answer any more than you do. But with that in mind, what I wanted to do is kind of share with you my America, the one I grew up in. Because the one thing I definitely am, I am a patriot. And I do want this nation to succeed, because if it doesn't, it takes the whole world with it. And then China dominates, and that's it. Russia has battered itself against Iraq and Ukraine, and while it is a power, it's not a superpower. What inertia and economic force it had built up, it's destroying itself. In Europe, there's not a lot there. So if it's not America, it's China. And by that extension, that's where the world goes. Communism, authoritarianism. Keep in mind, too, that America started this whole trend towards liberal democracies. We were the first nation in modern history to go with a democracy. Now, of course, people will bring in, it's a republic, yada, yada, yada. Stop it. Quit quibbling over hairs. It's a democracy. It's not a direct democracy. It's a republic. It's an electoral. It's a representative democracy. Use whatever you want. But it's a democracy. And it set a trend which overall, while democracies have major issues and major problems, is a shitload better than a monarchy, an autocracy, and definitely better than communism or similar. You know, it's definitely the lesser of the evils there, because people need a government. Remember, there was a time when anarchists were the thing, and it was an anarchist that started World War I with an assassination. The idea that humans don't need a government is patently absurd. It might actually be dumber than communism. I know that's hard to believe, but yeah. But I wanted to kind of walk through the country I was born into, grew up in, my perspective. Keep in mind, mine is different than yours, and different than the millions of Americans. And that's okay. America was, and hopefully still is, a melting pot. A land of immigrants. A land of opportunity. And so, it's not just what's good for me or you, it's what's good for our fellow citizens. And really, I would say by extension, the world. I don't want America to have an attitude of, I've got mine, Jack, and screw the rest of the world. No, all humans have a right to live. And even people, if they live under a government you don't like, that doesn't therefore follow that the people have much of a choice in it. In fact, they may hate that government even more than you do. Yeah. So, I was born in what was considered Generation X. Late Generation X, but there you go. Often the forgotten generation, or the one sandwiched in between the boomers and the millennials that seem to have a go at each other every minute on the internet. Sometimes I think my generation plays referee. I think other times we just sit back with popcorn and watch the other two fight, because we really are a transitional group. It's almost like we have one foot in the past with the boomers and one foot in the future with the millennials. So let me take you back to not long after Ronald Reagan was elected, and he too had a thankfully non-successful assassination attempt. We just left a disgraced president, Jimmy Carter. Although, you know, in hindsight, very nice man, but his presidency had issues. Of course, before that we had Nixon, and there was another disgraced president. Yeah, the 70s was not a great time for American presidents. I'm not going to lie. Of course, the 60s weren't a great time for assassinations either. And my point is, there's always been turmoil. And frankly, I would say I was blessed to be born in a very stable generation, and I got to grow up and enjoy America at one of its heights, or at least the end of the beginning of the heights. Let me explain. So when I was young, my first childhood memory was my 3rd birthday party. Although I have some earlier kind of snapshot memories, but I couldn't place when and where. But that was my first solid memory that actually runs in my head. And I can tell you what, when, and where. I can even tell you some of the birthday gifts I got for that. Now, I was adopted. It's neither here nor there. And I had good parents. And I even stayed on good terms with my biological parents. So, not a lot of drama. Let's just say my parents were very, very young when I was born. And they got divorced not long after, and because of my medical situation, being in and out of the hospital, things happen. It's the way of life. So also some of my earliest memories are being in the hospital. I had a lot of hospital visits. The funny thing is, I like doctors. I do not like hospitals. They give me the heebie-jeebies. So I never really blamed the doctors when I had to go, but I sure didn't like the hospitals themselves, the smells and the sounds. And also having to come to terms with my mortality. As soon as you're old enough as a child to understand the concept, they tell you, hey, anytime you go in for surgery, there's a chance you may not come out, you might not wake up. That's some heavy stuff to lay on a kid. But I also appreciated that they did it, because I've always been the kind of person that would rather face things head on. I definitely experienced fear. Absolutely. The difference is I confront it. I power through it. That's who I am. At least who I became in time. When I was young, there was of course no internet. VHS was new. You were doing really good to have cable TV. And cable TV was maybe 18 channels, at least in my hometown. But a lot of people didn't even have that. And it wasn't weird. It was playing out in the yards. I remember making several friends in kindergarten and 1st grade. Some of which I stayed friends with through high school and college and long after. Although pretty much all but one we've drifted apart in life. One I still have to this very day. In fact, we just spoke a few days ago. In fact, we get on the phone for hours at a time sometimes. Of course, others I met back then are no longer with us. One very dear friend, probably my first best friend, killed himself years ago. A long time ago now. I still think, what if? I think people do that. On the other hand, he had a really bad go of life for a while there, and while I wish he hadn't done what he did, I understand. Doesn't mean I condone it, but I understand why life just got to be too much. But that was later on. Growing up, I was mostly happy. True, I had to face that life isn't fair a lot earlier than most folks do. Being born with a disability, being born blind. I did have moments where that really frustrated me when I was young, 6, 7 years old. It's difficult for any child to not be able to go and play all the games that other children do. And to be fair, children were not cruel to me, generally speaking. And the ones that tried, to be honest with you, I could hold my own just fine. I gave as good as I got, and in my experience, the potential wannabe bullies, which I don't remember anything major in my school anyway, either ended up being friends or just kind of left me the fuck alone because I wasn't fun to torment. And I'm going to be honest too, at times I myself was probably a little bit of a bully. I am far from a perfect person. I have done and said things and hurt people. To this very day, I try to make amends for things I've done. But anyway, Another decision my parents made was not to send me away to the school for the blind, which would have been like 2 hours from our home. I went to regular public school, of course with accommodations. And I had good teachers and did well in school. I've always enjoyed learning. I've always enjoyed studying. One of my earliest childhood memories of being in school was when the Challenger exploded. Yeah, they had wheeled in a TV for students to watch. That was quite a big deal. 1986. So that was a thing that happened. Yeah, my parents in the previous generation got to see the moon landing. We got to see a shuttle do the opposite of landing. And of course, the Cold War was still raging at that time, peaks and valleys. But it was still going on. And I recall when the Berlin Wall came down. Again, Reagan was president, and then of course George Bush the first. Saturday Night Live, back when it was actually good. At least we thought it was as kids. I remember staying up Saturday nights to watch it with my cousins. I remember going out to the cabin. Not, of course, mine, I'm building. That would be interesting. No, it wouldn't be much later in life that I found out how to time travel. But back then, it was the old red cabin. And they had the old green cabin. And so we'd go out there 4th of July, sometimes other holidays too, and the whole family would go out there. And that was back when it was all shady, tree-covered dirt. Often by that time of the year, dusty roads. You had to go slow. It was true country back then out there. And you didn't really notice it. I mean, yeah, good memories. Of course, we had Atari when I was very young. That was the thing. And then Nintendo came out. And I had an Apple IIe computer. This is my first computer. And yeah, believe it or not, there was a speech program for it back then. It was a box you plugged in. And then you had a disc. And the old dot matrix printers. I was just reminiscing with my mother the other day about how we would print out cards and banners for birthdays and whatnot, and you'd hear the rack, and then you had to tear the edges off the pages. The little holes, the strips. That was what computers were. Of course, we didn't have internet. Bigger areas would have dial-up BBSs, bulletin board systems. But here in rural Arkansas, nah. Any BBS would have been long-distance calling, and that was that. But I do remember when cordless phones came to the house. When I started off, it was rotary dials, then touch pads came in, and then the cordless phones were real uptown. That level of freedom was so cool, to be able to talk on the phone in your bed, or even walk out in the backyard, maybe if you had a good one that could reach. Of course, you'd always forget to put it up, and then the battery would die, and yeah. Of course, back then, we had party lines for some. My cousins had that. They were on a party line. We weren't, because we lived in town. But of course, it was just one line in the house, so if anyone else picked up the phone, you could hear it. Of course, when internet did come around in the early 90s, oh, that would shit on your internet session right proper. If you can't tell, it was a good place for me. I recognize as an adult now, it wasn't always for everyone, every place, all the time. But it was for me. Of course, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. But I had a good family. I made good friends. And generally speaking, I lived in a community where I knew everyone. And, again, not saying it wasn't without its problems. But it was a positive, generally speaking, place. And even though a lot of people were Democrat, this was the South in the 80s, keep in mind. You know, they still liked Reagan. And even though when Clinton came in the 90s, there were a lot of Republicans that still kind of liked old Bill Clinton. At least, you know, wasn't too bad, they thought. And we kind of knew where we were going. Democracy, voting, kind of that right was still ingrained. Now, I could sit here and tell you all the things Reagan did wrong, but that's not really the point. I'm giving perspective from when I was a kid. I can also tell you when Unsolved Mysteries came out, that was the scariest shit ever on TV back then. There wasn't any way to fact check what was on there. You just took it was supposed to be real, so you took it as real. And to be fair, some of it was. But, yeah. By the way, that was kind of what reignited the whole Roswell thing. I know you think of it as a big thing, but Roswell, the whole idea, really was dormant in the 70s, so you didn't really hear much about it. It only really got legs again in the 80s. Funny as that is now to us. Remember once we were watching Unsolved Mysteries, and they were talking about Bigfoot, Sasquatch. And they said somewhere, and I was, you know, still young enough. And the place they were talking about, I think, was in Washington or Oregon. But it was just a place name. And I asked my dad, because we were watching there, because that's back when people, you know, families watched around the TV in the living room after dinner. I said, where's that at? And he goes, oh, that's out by the cabin. So he had me believing that these Bigfoot sightings that were Unsolved Mysteries were out near our cabin. Knowing him, we were probably going to the cabin the next weekend. We, as a nation, knew who we were. We had our differences, but we had a certain foundational bedrock. We knew we were of the people and by the people. We knew we did not want communism or dictatorship. We didn't want government coming in telling us what to do. Keep in mind, I'm simplifying, just to, you know, there we go. Kind of giving it perspective of a child. But I bet a lot of people that were older than me in the 80s would say something quite similar. No? I remember when the first Gulf War happened. It's actually the first time I was truly cognizant of CNN and kind of the modern news. In fact, that to me is when the modern era started. You had smart weapons and things, and you had really good television coverage. And it was America's chance to redeem itself in its own eyes after the tragedies and horrors and, frankly, embarrassments that were from Vietnam. You know, I've often heard it said in recent times that, you know, Russia is bound to win in Ukraine because they have more people than the Ukrainians. That's not how war works. America has more population than Vietnam. Russia still had more people than Afghanistan. It doesn't mean you're going to win. That's not how that works. Anyway, the Gulf War. It was a point of national pride, and it was kind of a look-see at the next generation of military tech. And I think it matters to some extent that George H. Bush himself was a veteran who saw combat. He knew war was not glorious, that wars had to be fought, fascism or communism had to be stopped, but you didn't drag it out, and you did everything you could to avoid it. And generally speaking, it was conducted well. Some even then thought we should have gone to Baghdad and ended it, but well, that was proven later to be folly. And it wasn't long after the Gulf War that we, quote-unquote, won the Cold War. 1991 was a pretty good year for American morale. Yeah, we won the Cold War. Something that had been going on before I was born and had, up to that point, been my entire life. Almost my parents' entire lives. Almost. They were born just a few years before you could say it started, but yeah. That was a good feeling. And it was a good feeling for a lot of nations and a lot of people in Eastern Europe and Russia proper. There's a reason that so many former Warsaw Pact nations rushed to join NATO. Keep in mind, some like Poland, well, really all of them, but some places, especially like Poland, they didn't have a choice. Communism was thrust upon them. In other places, like Romania, the dictatorship was brutal. The 92 election, that's probably the first election I really remember and was involved in. Of course, Bill Clinton was running, he'd been our Arkansas governor. I remember the 88 election, Dukakis, Bush, but 92 I really paid attention to. It's funny, too, because a lot of folks around here didn't think Clinton would win. But I think after 12 years of a Republican in the White House, even if, you know, a lot of people still like George H. Bush, yeah. Plus, the taxes thing kind of crushed him. But there was a level of civility there that I grew up with in politics. Heck, I remember being told that mudslinging was bad. I know that's funny to say with where we've come from. But yeah. And I also remember political cooperation. I remember when each party had their own sides and ways of doing things, and there could definitely be knockdown, drag-out fights. But when it was truly felt to be important, they could come together for what was thought of the good of the nation as a whole. And the mindset that they were there to serve was at least given lip service. Here's the problem. The people that were there in the 90s, a lot of them are the same people that are there today. Yeah. We've developed a political class. That's something we really should never have, and that is not good for the health of any democracy. But that's all to come later. The Clinton presidency, the era that I grew up in, the era I was a teenager and became a young adult in, had my first drink of liquor during, slept with a girl for the first time, had my first job, went to college, of course graduated high school, little out of order there, oh well. It was a pretty good time. The economy was doing alright. We were still riding high from 1991. We were gaining more and more allies around the world. China was a good trade partner, but hadn't quite reached the ascendancy that we would see later. Here's the thing. Many of the seeds were already planted for what was to come in the 21st century. They had. But we were unaware. And the internet came in, and computers. Last July I did a video kind of just my history of the internet and thoughts. That was so cool. But in the beginning we had the dial-up long distance, so it was also very rare. But once we finally got a local ISP, 95, 96, I had AOL 92 or so, 93. Still was Windows 3.1.1. But I had to dial into Fort Smith, which was about 45 minutes down the road, maybe an hour before the new interstate. But that was long distance. So you only did that a couple of times a month to download this or check that, do email occasionally. But once I got a local, I was able to get on there. And there just wasn't a whole lot to do compared to today. This was pre-eBay, pre-Amazon. But it didn't matter. Even a few websites were cool. Fan websites for video games, movies. You could download things. If you didn't mind waiting forever and no one picked up the phone in your house to destroy it. Some people, of course, could do video games. Doom was king back then. Doom 2. And most of the internet was kind of tech people. It was a little bit exclusive. And a lot of bit nerdy. And it was a really wonderful place. It really was. I remember the first chat programs. AOL had a messenger. ICQ is the one I used. My cousins, that I've referred to already, told me I had to download this so we could communicate over the internet. Yeah, we could have picked up the phone, but it was cool to communicate over the internet. It was also cool because you met people around the world, just random strangers, whoever else who might have had an internet connection. And that was right, again, when Eastern Europe was really opening up to the West and the communists were ending. So to talk to these people that 10 years earlier had been behind the Iron Curtain and just to freely chat with someone was so neat and eye-opening about different ways of life. And therein lie the seeds of me eventually going to Russia and doing all that. That fascination with other areas, other places, other people. I like people that are different than me because you can learn from them. And if I'm being honest, you all are different from me. I'm different from you. I never had the chance to fit in. I'm disabled. I'm blind. I was always the other. And you can either lament that and get mad, or you can make it a strength and you can play into it. So to me, everyone's different and weird. But that's okay. It's interesting. So that was the early days. Like I said, then I would graduate high school and go to college. Had all those firsts. Went to concerts with friends, went on road trips. I was a bit of a hellraiser in my late teens. Did some partying, went some places. Probably should have died more than once, and I'm not being hyperbolic. Yeah, I'm actually thrilled to be alive. Also without an arrest record. Someone up there was probably looking out for me. But I had fun, and I had friends, and what I can say is it was just about fun. I never was into like vandalism or anything mean. That's not to say I didn't have my low points. Times when I treated people incorrectly and still hate that. But you can't change what was done. All you can do is learn from it. Learn from your mistakes. But of course, it was around this time that I really just discovered that reality was just a simulation anyway, and it, didn't really matter. And that while some people are living, there's a lot of people out there that are de facto NPCs, and they can be hacked. More on that later, though. I really enjoyed my time in high school, especially my senior year. Junior year had a rough start. The first half of junior year was pretty dramatic, but second half got a lot better. And senior year was great. And then the summer after my senior year was just one big long party with my friends, to be honest with you. And then I went to college. Now, I know there's this kind of stereotype about colleges today being these liberal areas. I want to be honest, I have no idea what colleges are like today. I haven't been a student in a very long time. I can only say what they were like when I was there and where I was at. I'm sure if I'd gone to California or New York, it might have been different. But where I went, it was far from liberal all the time, all the way. In fact, I remember when the Tea Party movement began, I ended up going to one of their earliest get-togethers. We didn't really know what it was back then or what was going to happen, but yeah. And that was actually through 2 college professors, liberal arts professors at that. Be careful who you prejudge. Be careful of stereotyping people, because they might just surprise you, because we're all individuals, except for the NPCs. We all have our own minds, or at least we should. And that is the problem with the modern internet, the groupthink. And people no longer reach out to others around the world like they once did. And that's sad. I am so goddamn grateful, looking back, that I had the time, the friends, the family that I did. I am so glad to have been alive and young when life was an adventure in that America. The America that was firmly democratic, where politics still had civility, where we went for quite a long while without huge catastrophes and war. We didn't have a lot of war. We had actions, peacekeeping actions, but that's different. Where we had a good economy, where technology was promising a better future and just over the horizon. The earliest days of discovering what the internet could do. I remember when eBay came around. I remember signing up for it, and then PayPal. All good times. But I also remember the old way of life. CB radios. Rotary dial phones. A lot of people still have black and white televisions. The original Nintendo. Even a little bit of the original Atari. Like I said, my generation has a foot in each world. And things were well. Things were good. In 2000, Al Gore and George W. Bush. And that was contentious, because it was truly a close election. However, the processes were followed, the Supreme Court was consulted, ballots were counted, and in the end, Al Gore conceded. There was never really any threat of political violence. Life went on, and everyone considered George Bush Jr. the president. As 2001 came around. But we didn't get a killer AI computer, and we didn't send a voyage to Jupiter, or Saturn if you read the book. Instead, we got 9/11. What began over a decade earlier with the Gulf War, and then the collapse of the USSR, came to an immediate screeching halt on September 11, 2001. That was the day that American invulnerability was shattered. And I think also for a lot of people, the false illusion that America was just universally beloved and the good guys was also shattered. And I had been in New York just over 2 years earlier. I was there in August of 1999 for a while. It was about 6 weeks there. So I'd been in those places and those things. I remember when it happened. I was on the bus going to work and school when the news happened, and then we were sent home. And so I had to wake up my girlfriend, who I lived with at the time, and tell her what happened. It's one of my first, I guess that would have been my first apartment, because I lived in the dorms for a while. And then we got a place together, and yeah, I remember that. It was a thing. And it set the tone for the 21st century for this nation that I do greatly care about. And that's where this nation really started to change. Because it was no longer invulnerable. And I want to remind people of something. That's when our NATO allies came to help us. As much as we want to think that NATO is useless and, a European thing, it was used to help America more as much as anyone else during 9/11 and afterwards. Our allies came to our help too. I just want to remind that. And then, of course, the Afghanistan war started. And a year and a half later, the second Iraq war started. And we would batter ourselves against the rocks. And for what purpose and goal, I'm not sure anyone knows. I don't think George W. Bush was an evil president or man exactly. No worse than many others. I remember some people were walking around with impeach hats on for him, and I found that rather embarrassing. Not saying he didn't make mistakes, don't get me wrong, but yeah. Of course, also in 2003, the Space Shuttle Columbia exploded. But I guess for some variety, it was on re-entry as opposed to takeoff. So now twice in my life, I got to see a space shuttle explode. And I was actually awake. I'd been up all night doing something and got in the car and heard it on the radio bright and early that day. That was depressing. Yeah. The 21st century hit America hard and fast. And while the 2004 election went relatively easy and smooth, 2005 Katrina happened, and Yeah, there are a lot of accusations about not providing support to minorities or low-income areas of New Orleans. I don't live there, I can't speak to that, but it was something that happened. This was thinking. One of the first people I really got to know on the old ICQ days back when was from down there. She, and yes, it was a she, and yeah, we did talk on the phone. I don't remember anything romantic ever being between us. Just, again, the early days of the internet, you were thrilled just to talk to someone. I think we definitely liked each other in a certain way, but back then it was just it wasn't even a thing of meeting someone on the internet. That wasn't a thing. But now it's just kind of lamenting about that area and kind of just reminded me of her. At that point, I was no longer an undergrad, of course. I was in grad school. And I'd finished that up in 2006. I'd taken a couple of semesters off here and there. One to go back to New York, one to go to Russia. Yeah. The America I grew up in, it was changing. The economy was not as good. Our place in the world, not as assured. And Russia, which was once a good ally after the whole communist thing, well, it had a new leader, a certain Vladimir Putin. And the seeds were there too for what would come. And in D.C., the same elder boomer generation was still clinging to power. And it's getting a little worrisome, if I'm being honest. But still a lot to go. In 2008, you guys elected Barack Obama. I say that because I was actually out of the country. That was interesting. I honestly don't think it was a bad thing. After 8 years of Bush, we would have 8 years of Barack Obama. And yeah, I'll be honest, I don't think he was a bad president. Pitchfork me if you want. I don't really give a fuck. The country did all right, and I do think it was good as a nation that purports to be of equality and all that to have someone different and younger and from a different generation from what we'd seen in the White House before. And international reaction was pretty good. Like I said earlier, I do care about the world, not just America. And I want America to be a part of the world, not separate. Every time America's tried to be isolationist, it's not worked well for us or for anyone else. We don't live in an isolationist world. Products and economies cross boundaries, borders, time zones. The internet is everywhere and everyone. The time for isolationism is over. Love it or hate it, time must march forward. By this point, I had known the aliens for a very long time, and we'd had many discussions about that. Different cultures across the galaxy, the different paths they would follow. Some would obliterate themselves with neutron bombs. Some would wipe themselves out inadvertently with plague and disease. Some would let AI take over. Some would simply die out. They would burn up the fossil fuels on their planet, not have an alternative, be forced to return to an agrarian society, not be able to support their population, and there would be a mass collapse, and eventually stagnation and extinction. Some species would never leave their home planet and eventually be consumed when their star went nova, or freeze to death in the dark as it died. These stories have played out throughout the cosmos. The question is, where will we go? What will our story be? Where has the America I grew up in gone? To a certain extent, it never existed. To a certain extent, it's the rose-tinted glasses of a child and young adult. And this is something I think my generation shares with the boomers. They too grew up in an interesting time period. And really the pre-boomers too. Those who grew up in the 50s. If we're being objective and honest, the 1950s in America had lots of problems on the racial front and the gender front. However, when it comes to America's place in the world, our economy, our manufacturing capabilities, our inventiveness, America was at the height of its game, never to be repeated. Did I mention that Washington, D.C. is still dominated by boomers? Even some pre-boomers are still hanging out there. And I think a lot of them want to bring back the 1950s. Look, you can't turn back time. You cannot revert. If you could, do you not think so many human beings would bring back loved ones, save a child from dying, tell someone something before they were gone, reverse decisions that could change the course of history? But no. Once it's written, it's written. All you can do is march forward. But you get into their 70s and 80s, your mind is no longer elastic. Your mind is no longer able to look forward because you have no future. I'm sorry, but by that point in your life, in your 70s or 80s, there are far, far fewer days in front of you than behind you. All you have is your past, your accomplishments, your life, your legacy, and that's right and proper. That's what the old have. They should be resting, not working. This isn't a political thing. This isn't a left-right thing. This is a reality thing. And it's time for all of those to go. The future belongs to the young. They're the ones that have to live in it, experience it, deal with its problems. You cannot make this the 1950s or the 1990s again. I would love myself to go back to a pre-9/11 America. To my mind, that's when we were at our best. Part of it is truth, and part of it is the simple reality I experienced, and part of it is nostalgia. If I'm being honest, what I've told you, it's a biased report. It's my memory, how I choose to remember it. I remember drinking absinthe with David Lynch and talking with him about how we choose to store and recollect memory. And I do enjoy, for the most part, not dwelling on the negative, the bad things. I want to remember life in a positive manner as best I can. But I don't cut out the bad. I simply don't revisit those memories too often. But if I were to, there were times in the 90s, especially later on in life, when I was deeply depressed. And there were times when I lost friends, like I already mentioned. One to a car wreck, a couple to suicide. I've lost family members. I watched my aunt die right in front of me when I was 13, 14 years old. And when I say right in front of me, I mean like reach out and touch distance. Those memories are there. I remember my first heartbreak. And my second. I remember the alone desperation of that. I remember situations when I wasn't sure I was going to live. When I was lost. When I was in an accident. Yeah, I remember them. But I don't live there in my brain. And well, David made a movie called Lost Highway out of that thought process and experiment. You should watch it. It's like an acid trip without having to drop acid. Although, fair warning, if you do drop acid and watch it, it will mind fuck you. Guys, I have no answers. Just like you. All I can tell you for certain is I still don't want anyone to be hurt. Not me, not you, not Donald Trump, not Mexican immigrants to our country, not the people in Ukraine, not Israelis or Palestinians, not people living in China. And part of it is simply because life is hard enough itself. We have to fight nature and disease and our own mortality. Why should we fight each other? Now this might seem like a naive, idealistic view. To some extent it is. But it's a viewpoint I've come to after much hardship. Much struggle. I've gone through I'm not a pessimist, I'm a realist phase. I've gone through my nihilist phase. Nothing matters, so why does it matter? I've hurt people. I've said things that I couldn't take back. I've been through all of that. In the end, I decided I choose to live, and I choose to be happy as much as I can be. I choose to be optimistic because, being a nihilist, being pessimistic, life is going to suck. Being optimistic, life still may suck sometimes, but at least you might find moments of happiness and contentment. I'll take some happiness over none any day of the week. How about you? I've gone through the crucible of life, at least to this point. And while maybe I'm not out the other side, I'm still standing. I'm still here. How about you? I'm asking you, won't you join me in that? Won't you join me in actually trying to make a better reality that we live in? Even if it's just showing small kindnesses. Every bit helps. Every small bit can matter to someone, somewhere, sometime. So while I don't have an answer to any of this, I really don't, I do know it's a better life to live. To fight. To do what you can to make people's lives better. At the end of the day, that to me is the only legacy that really matters. Did we make the world we came into even just a little bit better when we left? Or did we take and take and take from the world and leave destruction and hardship in our wake? The choice is ours. What happens to us, the bodies we're born into, the events that happen, we can't control that. It's not our faults. But how we react, how we treat people, that's the only thing we really, truly own. When we die, it's those things that are going to matter. When push came to shove, did we make the right decisions? Are we happy with what we said and did? Can we rest easy knowing who we became? And again, we all screw up. It's okay. We all have a past. We've all hurt people. But we should also all grow and mature. And from that, become at least something like what we want to be. But we're not there as a nation, that's for sure. Something is gone. Something has slipped. Something is fundamentally wrong, and I think we all sense it. But we don't know what it is, where it comes from, and we don't know how to deal with it. Something is wrong, though. Like I said, I haven't had a whole lot to say lately. But I have been busy and productive. I just try to find some happiness and some peace when and where I can. Even if it's just stealing little moments here and there. How about you? If you can even stop one small hardship, one small bad thing, that makes a day worthwhile. Time moves on, I suppose. I just hope no one gets hurt. I do not like suffering. And I do not like to see sadness. Life is too short. And we only have one life. Isn't it worth living? Let's live. Let's be better as a people, a community, a nation. Let's turn the page and move to something new before it's too late. Let's take opportunities while we still can. Because before you know it, life is over.